Hello and welcome. Today, we're going to break down something called Good Clinical Practice, or GCP for short. Now, if you're involved in clinical trials with human participants, this is basically the global rulebook. It's the standard that makes sure all that research is both ethical and scientifically solid. So let's dive right in. Here's a quick look at our game plan. We'll kick things off by defining what GCP really is and what it's trying to achieve. Then, we'll get into its fascinating and, frankly, crucial history. After that, we'll look at the key groups that provide oversight, get to know the main players running the show, and finally, wrap up with how modern trials build in quality from the ground up. Okay, so first things first, what exactly is good clinical practice? Well, at its core, it's the ethical and scientific gold standard for any and all clinical trials. Now that sounds a bit formal, right? But think about what it really means. GCP covers the entire life cycle of a trial, from the very first idea all the way to the final report. And because it's an international standard, data from a trial in, say, Japan can be accepted in Europe. This is huge because it means we don't have to repeat studies unnecessarily, which is better for everyone. You know, every single rule in the massive GCP handbook, every procedure, it all boils down to these two fundamental goals. It's really that simple. Number one, protect the people in the trial. And number two, make sure the data we get is believable and accurate. You can't have one without the other. They're totally inseparable. And supporting those two main goals are these core principles. These are the absolute non-negotiables. A trial has to be ethical from the get-go. People must participate voluntarily, fully informed of what they're getting into. An independent ethics committee has to give the green light before anything starts. And quality isn't just something you check for at the end. It has to be baked in from the very beginning. But where did all these rules come from? Well, they didn't just appear out of thin air. The story of GCP is, well, it's a powerful and sometimes difficult lesson in why these protections became absolutely essential. They were forged in fire, really, in response to some major ethical breakdowns. You can see the journey right here. It started over a century ago, but the real turning point was after World War II. The Nuremberg Code was a direct response to the horrific experiments conducted by Nazi doctors. That led to the Declaration of Helsinki, which laid down more ethical principles. And finally, in the 90s, the ICH brought everyone together to create the global GCP standard that we still use, and, as you can see, continue to update to this day. And this quote, wow, it just gets right to the heart of it, doesn't it? Without a clear, agreed-upon definition of what's okay and what's not, the potential for harm is just staggering. GCP was created to be that clear line in the sand. So we have the rules, but who actually enforces them? Who are the referees? Well, that brings us to the independent groups that act as the guardians of clinical trials. Great question. It's basically a two-part answer. There are two main types of oversight, and while their jobs are different, they work together. Okay, so on one side, you've got the regulatory authority. Think FDA in the US or the EMA in Europe. They're the government agencies focused on the hard science, the safety data, and deciding if a drug gets approved. But on the other side, you have the Independent Ethics Committee, or IEC. Their focus is laser-sharp on one thing, protecting the people in the trial. They are the dedicated advocates for every single participant. And a huge part of the IEC's job is to put the informed consent form under a microscope. This is so much more than just a signature on a form. The IEC's job is to make sure this document clearly explains everything so a person can make a truly informed, truly voluntary decision about whether to participate. Okay, we've met the referees. Now let's turn to the players on the field. The two key roles that are responsible for actually running the trial day to day. So the whole thing really hinges on the division of labor between these two. The sponsor is kind of like the architect and the general contractor for a building. They start it, they fund it, and they manage the whole project. The ultimate responsibility lies with them. The investigator, on the other hand, is the site foreman. They're the ones on the ground at a specific clinic or hospital, running the trial and working directly with participants. So the investigator's world is very hands-on. They're making sure they have the right staff and equipment, they're providing medical care, and they're following the trial's master plan, the protocol, to the absolute letter. They're also managing the study drug itself and are personally responsible for that whole informed consent process we talked about. The sponsor's duties are more high-level, a bird's-eye view. They're setting up the overall quality systems, finding the right investigators for the job, making the drug, and dealing with the regulatory authorities. They're also responsible for monitoring all the different sites to make sure everyone is following the rules. And what's the one thing that connects them both? Documentation. Meticulous, detailed, comprehensive records. It is absolutely non-negotiable because it's the only way to prove without a doubt that the trial was done right, that people were safe, and that the data is solid.
And that brings us perfectly to our final section. How do we make sure this level of quality isn't just left to chance? It's all about being proactive.
Modern GCP is all about taking a risk-based approach. What that means is instead of treating every single piece of data as equally important, you focus on what's truly critical for keeping participants safe and for making sure the results are reliable. It's about working smarter, not just harder. And this is all managed through a really clear 5-step process. First, you figure out what could go wrong. Then you evaluate how likely and how bad it would be. After that, you put controls in place for the big stuff. Of course, you have to communicate that plan to everybody. And finally, you keep checking in to make sure your plan is actually working. Now, within that system, it's helpful to know the difference between quality assurance and quality control. Think of it this way. QA, or quality assurance, is proactive. It's about designing the system right in the first place, like writing really clear instructions. QC, or quality control, is reactive. It's the checks you do along the way to make sure people are following those instructions. So the crucial takeaway here is this. In a trial that follows GCP, quality is never, ever an accident. It is the direct result of careful planning, ongoing management, and constant verification, every single step of the way. All right, let's do a quick recap. GCP is built on 2 pillars, protecting people and getting good data. It was born from some of history's toughest lessons. It's watched over by regulators and ethics committees. It's run by sponsors who see the big picture and investigators who handle the details. And the whole thing is held together by a smart, proactive system for managing quality. And that leaves us with one final thought to chew on. You know, with technology and clinical trials evolving faster than ever, the core principles of GCP are going to stay the same, but how we apply them will have to change. So the big question is, how will GCP adapt to meet the challenges of tomorrow? Thanks for tuning in.